So, boundaries. I did a couple of takes before this and I was finding it a bit difficult. And I actually came across this experiential moment when I wondered what the difference between boundaries are, even across a camera. How does it feel when I'm really close and really intensely here at you, looking and staring, versus what is the experience of me being here? What is that? And how does that change your experience on your system and your bodily feeling? And how is it for me to be here? So boundaries are an interesting one because sometimes they can be things that we don't even think about. They're kind of this invisible barrier. And when we think about boundaries, they can be both physical and also kind of emotionally psychological ones. So what do we mean by that? So the physical ones we kind of just felt there a little bit, right? So there's the body, there's the personal space, there's personal space within your home or if you're in the office. And then we have emotional, psychological boundaries, which are things like time, emotion, energy, values. And we draw these kind of lines. And whether we're aware of them, whether they're too far or too close, if we feel like somebody is coming over it and kind of encroaching into our boundary, we can start to feel overwhelmed and kind of overloaded. And that all of a sudden may trigger the kind of the threat system at the back of our brain that says, here's a problem, I feel uncomfortable. And it can really kind of trigger that sympathetic nervous system, which then wants us to either fight or flight, react and respond to that person, maybe in a way that we're not so happy about doing, or get the hell out of there. Because that's basically what our system is doing, is saying that something is threatening us and therefore we need to do something. So where can this come up in a work situation? Well, maybe you take on too much work or someone takes on too much work. Maybe there's an intensity with the amount of people in the office, or maybe the intensity of your work, or your boss kind of being on your back the whole time, being on your nerves. It's there. Maybe we can also say yes too much because we want to please people. We want to kind of, show that we're doing a good job, and by saying yes all the time, all of a sudden the work piles on, and all of a sudden we have no space for ourselves. So that boundary is crossed then. And also it can just be a contextual thing. Nowadays, we do live in a very busy world. Our attention is being attracted by all different devices and expectations. We interact with more people than ever before. If you're like me and you live in the city, you're constantly having to deal with new challenges and experiences all the time. And this, again, can be overwhelming to those boundaries which look after time, energy, and our values. So why are boundaries important? Well, they can really create healthy relationships, firstly to yourself, to look after and respect what it is that you really believe and feel to be true, and also those for others as well. Sometimes when we're in relationship with people, certainly with friends, there is a kind of an unspoken relation and respect of each other's boundaries. And if something is kind of stepped over, we may say something. They're also there to protect us and protect our identity. By setting a level of boundaries, we can really start to build a sense of self-esteem to say, this is what I stand for and this is what I don't stand for. And so by having this kind of imaginary boundary, we can start to say, right, this is my space. This is who I am. And that can be very healthy. Also, creating these boundaries can really help with stopping the issues around resentment, stress, anxiety, overwhelming stress levels, and also our energy levels. So they can be really, really helpful. Okay, so this comes up a lot within a coaching session. People kind of feeling uncomfortable about the way certain situations are, either with people or with themselves. And we start to really look at How can we work with that? Firstly, on a cognitive basis. So we ask what's important. We can do work around values. When people are understanding what their values are, what they do stand for and what they don't stand for, they can then start to understand where they need to draw boundaries and not. Also, there's a level of what things can I take control of and what things are out of my control. So again, within my circle of influence, I have this control and this is within my remit. Outside of my boundary, that's not my problem. That's their problem. That's someone else's problem. And I'm not emotionally going to take that on, which again can happen very easy where somebody else is feeling something and we take it on. So we need to draw a boundary to say, no, this is my space. This is what I'm working with. Again, this can really help with self-esteem. Also really good to ask when boundaries can be flexible and when they need to be rigid. Now, you may have a boundary around a certain value, which to an adult, you might say, you know what, no, that's not okay. It's not okay for you to create lots of mess and come into my house and break stuff. But maybe with our children, that might be okay. You know, kids break stuff, they make a mess, that's what happens. So understanding and being flexible with our boundaries is really important. So maybe that's what we look on the cognitive level. On a somatic level, we might start to really feel what boundaries mean to us and really kind of engage the body as to having those senses. We've all had those experiences when we felt like our boundaries have been overstepped and it's draining and it's tiring, and again, the stress can create aches and pains. But we also know when we can start to open up and create capacity for others. So let's move that onto the mat and let's get physical. Here we have a few interesting ones actually, and one of these pieces which I'll do to you here is an EYP pose, so an embodied yoga pose. And maybe what we might like to do, and one of the yang expressions, is the no. So what we can do is we can put a foot forward, weight coming forward, put a hand up, and keep this one by our hip. Now obviously we're not going to fight anyone, but by embodying this pose, and I invite you to try it at home if you're watching this, how does that make you feel? Is this familiar? Is this unfamiliar? Where can you bring a bit more of this no, and I love you, or no, and thank you, no, that's enough for me at the moment, or no, I won't get there? Where can you bring that more into your life? Step out of that. Or we might even look at one which is a kind of a relationship no, where we can stand grounded and centered, holding the thing that we want to relate to, holding our boundary, holding what's important, and at some point turning the hand to create a stop, a no, so we can keep what's going on in front of us, or also being no to other things, saying no to more, no to overload. So we keep things in and no. So by taking this pose, we can really start to kind of get and embody that sense of experience of looking after what we have and saying no to things. And finally, one of my favorites, which comes from a new Zazu, which is a really interesting embodiment set of skills toolkit, is where we can start to look at, we stand in neutral in the middle, straight spine, arms soft, and we can go back into ourselves and honor and respect our own experience, sense of self. And then we can also then just move forward as we start to bridge with others. And we start to engage with the others and move between them. So how can I keep a sense of myself and my identity, respect my values and what's important to me, while also collaborating with others and working with others and feeding with each other, bridging with them. Now we don't want to overgo or pull too back. So when we find this sense of balance, of not being too vulnerable and stretched, maybe this looks good if it's coming from this way, this sense of self, back, and then we go forward. How does that feel when I'm working with you? And then coming back. So here we have a few little fun things to play with and just really start to bring in a sense of what's right for us and what feels good for us. I hope that's been interesting, and boundaries can be a really interesting thing to work with, and I hope in some way that this video has kind of explained a little bit, maybe just a bit around how we could work and just bringing that kind of physical element into it. Thanks very much for watching.